Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian. As China celebrates centenary of its ruling party, the CPC, I'm bringing you a special series of interviews with foreign ambassadors to China today. Ambassadors on China, their stories and experiences working and living in this country, and their thoughts on China's governance styles and the role of the ruling party. Let's start today with Egypt and the Egyptian ambassador to China. The two countries not only celebrate heritage of their ancient civilizations, but are also major developing countries seeking their own ways to face challenges and build a better future. This year marks 65th anniversary of China-Egypt ties. The relationship is one of those examples for solidarity and win-win cooperation between China and the Arab world. Earlier, Egyptian ambassador to China, Mohamed Elbadri, told me Egypt has been learning China's experience in its own fight against COVID-19.
I had my own program. This is the sculpture of the goddess Isis. She is the goddess of fertility and other things, and she is very famous not only in Pharaonic era, but also in the Greek and Roman era. So there is the concept of resurrection, there is the concept of the Trinity,
Yes.
and there is the concept of the motherhood.
Ms. Ambassador?
Yes, this is a very, very important picture. This is President Gamal Abdel Nasser and Mr. Zhou Enlai.
Yeah.
And it is not only represents a bilateral relationship between the two countries and the solidification of this at that time, but it also represents part of human history and human and historical development of the civilizations.
Both of them are legendary figures.
Yes.
In our history. And of course this one.
Of course, this is a very special one. These are our two presidents while signing the treaty between the two countries during the visit of my president here.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for hosting us here in the beautiful embassy.
Thank you very much for coming. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
A lot of history you showed me earlier.
Yes.
Wow. This year, of course, 100th anniversary of the birth of the Chinese Communist Party. Being the ruling party of China for more than 70 years, how do you see what has been done so far in China?
Well, history is about stages, and history of nations is about stages. The stages where, when you see the beginning, 100 years ago, when the establishment of the party, its first general committee meeting, and so on, it was the time, the embryonic time, the time when it was being formed. Later on, it took its natural path and natural course as a defender of the people and of China, until it was able to launch the Republic on the 1st of October 1949. After that, it went into stage 2 or 3, where it is starting to develop the country in accordance to its principles. And then and that was the time of the consolidation of the state. And here, Chinese history is very similar to Egyptian history. Yes, we have suffered very much from foreign occupation. Now it's not the case, but at any rate. And here we saw how the Chinese Communist Party was able to defend the country, attain its independence, and then the stage of consolidating the republic and the country itself. And this is not an easy task. You're talking about a country that is 10 times as big as my own country. And we are the second or third largest countries in Africa. So for a country that big, nearly 10 million square kilometers, and more than a billion in the population, this is something very difficult to do. And it has been consumed by foreign intervention. It has been consumed by a humiliating century, which we had similar in Egypt. So I can always see the contrast between the history of the two nations. And then after that, and I think this is where the brilliance of the party came, when they realized that they want to do it, as you might say, in socialism with Chinese characteristics, okay, which is the adaptation. The adaptation. Ideologically, at that time, it had its own course, but with the concept of globalization, with the concept of interdependence, and with the concept of how to make trade the engine of growth and development in the country. And then we had the genius of the vision of Mr. Deng Xiaoping, and how it started to adapt, and now how China is adapting, and the Communist Party is adapting to the international environment and the needs of its people.
I like the fact that you are talking about adaptation, because that's so crucial facing what we are having today, which is also a dramatically changing world, isn't it? Nobody knows where the world is gonna be, but we have to adjust every day, it seems. But you know, one of the key issues is about poverty alleviation. Both China and Egypt are developing countries and large-scale developing countries. Poverty alleviation has always been a key factor in both countries' development. Mr. Mazur, how do you observe the Chinese Communist Party's way of leading the country as the governing party in dealing with the poverty issue?
Well, I have to tell you that China was the first country in the world to achieve the Millennium Goal of poverty reduction or elimination of extreme poverty.
But there is a challenge now, which is how to maintain that growth, right? To maintain that progress rather.
Absolutely, but let me first tackle the first issue that you mentioned. The success story of China eradicating extreme poverty is something that I think that all the world has to learn from. At least in as far as an embassy is concerned and as an ambassador here. This is something which we are focusing about. How did China do it? It's a very complex process, and you cannot have it in 1 year or 2 years. It has to be a systematic, target-oriented, and vigorous in the way you're achieving it. And you have to do it in many simultaneous fields. You have to play on many simultaneous fields. And the Chinese CPC did it. First of all, it is how you were able to turn all in economies, in general economies, you always have a problem of trickle-down, the trickle-down effect, which is you can reach a high stage of development. I mean, you can reach 12% or 10% development. But how is this 12% trickled down to the main stratas of the society until you are able to reach the lowest and pull the lowest up? This is done by very strong conviction, governance, and direction. There's nothing wrong from learning. There's absolutely, it's a mistake if we don't learn. I always remember the words of the German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, who united Germany, and he said, "Fools like to learn from their own experiences, but I learn from the experiences of fools." So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to see what China did, and we need to watch it. And that's what we do here in the embassy. We are not working now. We are always working as well retroactively to see how we can transmit this experience, this example, so that my country can learn from.
But the two countries, one could also argue, are very different. And therefore, how much do your observation of where China has been and how China reached where it is, including the governance style of the Chinese Communist Party, could apply to your country at all?
You see, as you said, countries are different. And I remember when I was at the United Nations, we used to have a resolution about the concept of governance, the different forms of governments exists, and different forms of political system exists. And that's why we need to be very vigilant. You see, in economics, it's easier for you to adapt economic policies than political structures. So if you want to really learn, you can take from your economic policies and learn from it. But does that necessarily mean that Egypt should be structured in the same way as China, or China should be structured in the same way of Egypt? We are different. We are different. That doesn't mean that Egypt is better or that X country is better than Y country. No. Each country has its own prospects. Each country has its own experience in how it develops that. But the fundamental issue remains, as you mentioned, adaptation to the needs of the people. So when the governments or the type of governance is not adapting to the needs of the people, then you have a problem.
Mr. Ambassador, with your rich experience and observations about China during your ambassadorship, how do you see China is trying to learn about all of these possibilities and nuances and try to come up with some kinds of most efficient way for China, at least?
It's a holistic approach. And I have to, it might not be a direct answer to your question, but let me twist it from the other side. The Chinese experience in education.
Okay.
Because education is the base. The amount of Chinese students abroad learning from the experiences of everybody else. Let's say something like stock exchange. If you want to have something like developmental structure, all of these kind of things, you need to learn it. And you get this knowledge. And if you see the Chinese government, how steadily they have been sending students, even though you have 2-3 of the top 20 ranking universities. But despite of that, it's not enough. I want to send to everywhere in the best places. I have bumped into people who are 24, 25 years, and they have been sent by the government to learn in Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, MIT, Stanford, and so on. This means that you learn, you get the experiences from this, and you get your own experiences. And through this, you can put together the model that China needs in the different paths, on the different levels, by learning, by accumulating knowledge, and by seeing the type of governance that you might need. Because something might need a different style.
So you need to learn and compare and navigate, experiment, and eventually maybe find the best way of the time, and yet have to move on and progress as time goes by. My last question is about the recent developments. It seems that the Chinese Communist Party and the people here are quite proud of what China has managed to do in terms of dealing with COVID-19, both sharing the very first study of the sequence to the rest of the world, and also the early prevention and control, particularly the heroic actions of the lockdowns in the city of Wuhan,
Yes.
which saved, one could argue, China and the rest of the world. Mr. Ambassador, how do you see the governance challenges and opportunities? How do you see we are to better ourselves even after the pandemic?
There is no doubt that right now China is the safest country when it comes to COVID-19. And that is a result of the governance. When the outbreak of the Wuhan started, when the epidemic started in Wuhan, I remember it was around 11 February when we had a very big staff meeting, and I told them, listen, we have been following so far what the Chinese government has been doing. and we have reported it. Now we're going to put together a consolidated report. What did the Chinese government do? How did they do it? But more importantly, how we can adapt what the Chinese government did in Egypt should the epidemic strike there. And it was very beneficial. So we learned here from the Chinese experience.
Good for you, Mr. Ambassador.
Yeah, and my job is to give the example and give the experience to Egypt.
How did you get the messages across?
It was very simple. Even the Prime Minister called me on this matter, and we discussed it, and I told him this, because at that time, if you remember, in February 2020, nobody really knew what is going to happen and everything. So when we gave him, and we discussed it, I discussed it with His Excellency, and it was very useful for the government. And this is the job of the embassies. You have to transmit the experience. I know this was not your question, but this was something that I have to say. And another thing that I have to say as well is the solidarity that was reflected by the two countries in this matter. When Wuhan was struck, Egypt was the only country that sent a minister in the middle of this pandemic here to China with some assistance, nominal assistance. Of course, it was nominal compared to, but it showed the spirit of cooperation. And my president took a decision to light some of the Egyptian historical monuments with the Chinese flag as a sign of solidarity between the two countries. And when the pandemic struck in Egypt, our gratitude was so high. China was in the forefront. When the vaccine came out, China was in the forefront with Egypt. We received a lot of vaccines as present, and they opened up the factories for us to take vaccines. And now we are working. Vaccine issue is consuming something like 15 to 20% of my time with me and a colleague that is doing nothing but vaccine issues.
With pleasure, I guess.
We are happy about it, and we're doing this. So I know that these two comments were out of your question, but this is something that every Chinese has to know. We have a relation that goes back for 65 years. We were the first country to establish a relationship with China and to recognize China and to support the struggle of China to get its seat at the United Nations. And China was among the supporters of Egypt and a very staunch supporter of Egypt in most of these issues. So the pandemic is a reflection of the interdependent world that we're living in. No one can live by himself alone. Nobody can live secluded in the wall. You can do that. There were some experiences in this in history, and they all failed. Now the pandemic is a proof that this is an interdependent world. I like you or I don't like you, like him or I don't like her. We have to work together. This is the time for international cooperation. It is the time where we need to put all of us, all countries, all members of the United Nations, need to put their hand together. Because this is a threat against humanity. It is not a threat against a single nation, a single race, a single ethnicity, or a single religion. It's a threat to humanity. And here, humanity needs to work collectively. And unless we put our hands together, we are going to suffer. And this is just an example of what can happen in the future. When the influenza pandemic started in Europe in 1916, 1917, the interconnectedness of the world was very limited. People used to travel by boat if you could afford it. And today, no, there are flights, there are people coming, you're going, people-to-people contacts, and so on. So this is something that is of crucial importance. We need to sit, all of us, for humanity's sake, represents a common denominator for all countries to cooperate on.
Mr. Ambassador, it's with tremendous pleasure talking to you and to learn from a part-time historian.
Thank you.
And certainly a very efficient ambassador.
Thank you.
Congratulations to you and your team. Certainly best wishes to your people. Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, and best wishes to all the
appreciate it.
Chinese people. Thank you very much.